Okay, imagine this. The meat you eat, maybe your burger or chicken nuggets, isn't from a farm. It's grown, well, kind of brewed in these big steel vats.
Sounds like science fiction, doesn't it?
Totally. But it's actually happening. It's moving from labs into, well, potential reality. So today we're doing a deep dive into cultivated meat. You might have heard it called lab-grown meat or cell-based meat.
Yeah, and it really could revolutionize how we produce protein, how we eat protein globally.
So our mission here for you is pretty straightforward. We want to unpack the science, how this stuff is actually made.
And introduce you to the companies really pushing this forward. We'll explore the big promises, sustainability, animal welfare, maybe even health benefits.
But importantly, we'll also look hard at the challenges. There are definitely hurdles before this ends up in your shopping cart routinely.
Think of this as your shortcut to getting really up to speed on this potentially game-changing food tech.
And yeah, we've based this on all the latest research, recent articles, and insights into how these companies are trying to scale up production.
Right. So let's dive in. How? How does it work? How do you get from a cell to, well, a burger?
Yeah, the basics.
Okay, so the core idea is growing animal cells. But in a controlled environment, like a lab or a production facility, it completely skips the need to raise and slaughter the whole animal.
It's biology, but managed like an engineering project.
That's a great way to put it. Precision biology, maybe?
Okay, so step by step, where do the cells even come from? That seems critical.
It is. It starts with getting a tiny sample of animal cells. And it's harmless to the animal.
Okay.
These are usually stem cells because they have this amazing ability to differentiate, to turn into muscle cells, fat cells, connective tissue.
All parts of meat.
Exactly, all the components. And this sample, it can come from a living animal, think a small biopsy, really similar to drawing blood.
Right.
Or maybe an embryo, or sometimes they use a cell bank, like a library of high-quality cells they've already established.
Okay, you've got the cells. What's next? I'm picturing those big steel tanks, almost like beer brewing. Am I on the right track?
You absolutely are. The cells go into these large vessels, usually stainless steel, called bioreactors.
Bioreactors, got it.
Think of them as very sophisticated incubators. Inside, the cells are bathed in this liquid called a growth medium.
Like cell food.
Exactly. It's a nutrient soup, basically. A carefully balanced mix of amino acids, glucose, sugars, vitamins, minerals, everything the cells need to grow and multiply.
And the bioreactor keeps everything just right. Temperature, oxygen.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It maintains the perfect conditions. Optimal temperature, pH, oxygen levels. This encourages the cells to multiply like crazy and then, crucially, to differentiate into the muscle and fat tissues we want.
Okay, that makes sense for ground meat, maybe nuggets. But what about steak? Something with structure and texture. That feels way harder.
It is harder, and that's where scaffolding comes into play.
Scaffolding, like for buildings.
Sort of, but edible, obviously. To get that familiar meat-like texture, especially for more complex pieces, companies use these structures. They can be made from plant-based materials, maybe algae derivatives, and this scaffolding acts like a framework. It encourages the cells to grow in layers, to organize themselves in a way that mimics natural muscle.
Ah, so it gets them shape and texture.
Exactly. Then, once the tissue grows to the right density and structure on this scaffold, it's harvested. Then it's processed and shaped into, burgers, sausages, nuggets. Eventually, the hope is more complex cuts, too.
It sounds so futuristic, but you mentioned this isn't exactly a brand new idea.
Not at all, actually. The core concept goes way back. A Dutch researcher, William van Eelen, was thinking about this in the 1950s.
Wow, the 50s.
Yeah, and even earlier, technically, a pathologist named Russell Ross grew guinea pig aorta cells in vitro back in 1961. But the moment everyone remembers, the big splash, was 2013.
Right, the famous burger.
Exactly. Dr. Mark Post unveiled the world's first lab-grown hamburger, and the cost was just astronomical.
Over $300,000, wasn't it?
That's right, $300,000 for one patty.
That really highlights the cost challenge they've been tackling. And I guess it also explains why the first products we're seeing or hearing about are minced things, burgers, nuggets.
Precisely. It's just technically simpler. Muscle cells and fat cells, they actually like slightly different growing conditions. And recreating the really intricate structure of a whole cut, like a steak with marbling, that's a huge biological and engineering hurdle.
Much easier to grow the cells and then just process them into a ground form.
Exactly. So that's where most companies started.
Okay, so that's the basic science. Fast forward to now. Where are we in terms of actually getting this stuff to market? What's the main bottleneck?
Well, the science of how to grow the cells isn't really the mystery anymore. The single biggest challenge now, it's scaling up.
Making enough of it,
Well,
affordably.
yes. Scaling production so it's cost-effective and widely available, that's the mountain everyone's trying to climb right now.
And some companies are making real progress, right? Like Upside Foods in California.
Absolutely. Upside Foods is a big one. Their EPIC facility, that's Engineering, Production, and Innovation Center in Emeryville, California, is seriously impressive.
How big are we talking?
It's about 53,000 square feet,
Yeah.
designed to produce initially 50,000 pounds of cultivated meat a year, but they say it can scale up to 400,000 pounds.
Wow. And they're focused on chicken.
Primarily chicken, yeah. And they've been working very closely with the U.S. regulators, the FDA and USDA, to get the green light. They actually got the first ever FDA approval for cultivated meat.
Okay, who else is making moves?
Another interesting one is Mission Barns. Their niche is cultivated pork fat.
Just the fat.
Yeah, they realized fat is key for flavor and mouthfeel. So they grow pork fat and often blend it with plant-based proteins to make hybrid products. They got what's called a no questions letter from the FDA in, I believe, early 2025 for their fat.
It basically means the FDA is satisfied it's safe.
Exactly. So you might start seeing their fat-enhancing things like meatballs or bacon in restaurants or maybe supermarkets through partnerships.
And didn't Singapore actually beat everyone to the punch in terms of selling it?
They did. Singapore was the first country globally to approve cultivated chicken for sale. That was back in 2020.
And a company called Good Meat is selling it there.
That's right. Good Meat, which is the cultivated meat division of Eat Just, has been selling cultivated chicken in Singapore since December 2020. You could even buy it at a traditional hawker stall for a while.
Wow, that's like a real-world trial run.
Definitely. And they're also waiting for U.S. regulatory approval, just like Upside.
It feels like things are moving, slowly but surely. Are there others we should know about?
Oh, yeah. The field is buzzing. You've got Mosa Meat, which is Dr. Mark Post's company, the guy behind the original burger. They're still refining things. Finless Foods is working on seafood, specifically culturing bluefin tuna cells.
Tuna. That tackles overfishing concerns.
Potentially, yes. And then there are companies really pushing boundaries, like Primeval Foods. They're exploring, well, more exotic meats.
Exotic. Like what?
Things like lion and zebra.
Wait, lab-grown lion meat?
That's what they're exploring. The idea is you could potentially try these meats without any impact on wild populations. It's definitely out there.
That is wild. So it's not just replacing beef and chicken. It could open up totally new food experiences. And it extends beyond meat too, right? This whole cellular agriculture thing.
Absolutely. The technology, often using something called precision fermentation, is broader. Look at Perfect Day. They're using microflora, like fungus, engineered to produce real dairy proteins, specifically cow whey protein.
Without needing cows.
Exactly. And their protein is already in thousands of products: ice creams, cream cheese, protein powders. It's lactose-free, functional.
And eggs too.
Yep. Every company is doing something similar for egg whites, making real egg white protein without chickens. Think baked goods, nutrition bars, drinks. It shows this whole approach. Growing ingredients cell by cell could really reshape huge parts of our food system.
Okay, the how is fascinating. The who is moving fast. But let's get to the why. Why is this such a potentially big deal? What's the promise here?
Right, the why. This is where it gets really compelling, especially when you start with the environment.
The livestock farming has a huge footprint. We know that.
Huge. It accounts for something like 14.5% of all human-caused greenhouse gas emissions. Cultivated meat offers a fundamentally different approach. You're shifting from, vast land use and resource-heavy biology to something much more contained and potentially efficient.
So real numbers, how much better could it be?
Well, studies project pretty dramatic reductions. Greenhouse gas emissions could be cut by up to 90%, maybe even 96% lower carbon footprint than conventional beef, and this is a key, if it's produced using renewable energy.
Okay, renewables are key. What about water and land?
Also, massive savings. Think about this. Producing 1 kilogram of beef takes roughly 15,000 liters of water.
15,000.
Yeah. Cultivated meat could slash water use by 82% to 96%. And land use, potentially 98% less land needed. That has huge implications for deforestation, habitat loss.
That environmental case seems strong. Then there's the ethical side. For a lot of people, this is the main thing.
Absolutely. This is a massive shift for animal welfare. Lab-grown meat completely eliminates the need for animal slaughter.
No factory farms, no slaughterhouses.
Right. It offers a much more humane way to get meat, drastically reducing animal suffering. Groups like PETA have actually supported and even invested in this research for that very reason.
But it's not technically vegan, right? because the cells originally came from an animal.
That's a crucial distinction. Correct. It eliminates slaughter, but because the process starts with animal cells, it isn't considered vegan or even vegetarian by most definitions.
Okay. And what about us? Health and safety. Any advantages there compared to the meat we eat now?
Potentially, yes, big ones. First, safety. Because it's grown in a sterile, controlled environment, the risk of contamination from bacteria like Salmonella or E. coli things, often linked to meat processing, should be much, much lower.
Fewer food poisoning outbreaks, maybe.
That's the hope. Also, antibiotics. Conventional meat production uses huge amounts of antibiotics, which contributes to antibiotic resistance, a major public health threat. Cultivated meat could drastically reduce that need.
Although, is it totally antibiotic-free? I've heard some debate.
That's a fair point. It's nuanced. While the goal is often antibiotic-free production, some companies might still use them in small amounts in the cell culture phase just to prevent any bacterial contamination in the bioreactors. The industry is working on eliminating that, but it's something to watch.
And then there's this idea, which sounds almost sci-fi again, of customizing nutrition.
Right. This is really revolutionary. Because you're building the meat cell by cell, you have this potential control over its composition.
Like less bad fat, more good fat.
Exactly. You could potentially design meat with less saturated fat and cholesterol, maybe boost it with omega-3s or extra vitamins. You could even theoretically tailor meat for specific dietary needs. That's a completely new way to think about protein.
Okay, the potential is clearly huge. Environment, ethics, health. But it sounds too good to be true sometimes. Let's talk about the roadblocks. What's stopping this from taking over the meat aisle tomorrow?
Yeah, there are definitely significant hurdles. It's not simple. Maybe the first one to mention is regulation.
Governments need to approve it.
Absolutely. And they're being cautious, which is understandable. They need to ensure it's safe, that it's labeled clearly so consumers know what they're buying. The U.S., with the FDA and USDA, has started granting approvals.
Like for Upside and Good Meats Chicken.
Right. But Europe, for instance, has much stricter regulations around novel foods, and things are moving a lot slower there. It's a patchwork globally.
And then there's the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
Cost. That $300,000 burger.
Yeah.
We're not there anymore, but it's still expensive, right?
Definitely still more expensive than conventional meat.
Oh, yeah.
Prices have plummeted, really dramatically since 2013, but getting it down to compete with, say, supermarket chicken or beef, that's still a major focus.
Where do the costs come from?
A big chunk is the growth medium, that nutrient soup for the cells. It's complex and can be expensive to produce at scale. And then just the cost of building and running these large, sophisticated bioreactors efficiently. Huge R&D is going into bringing those costs down.
Okay, regulatory hurdles, cost.
Yeah.
What about just people? Are consumers ready for this?
That's a massive question mark. Consumer acceptance. There's definitely skepticism out there.
The ick factor.
Yeah, partly the ick factor, or just unfamiliarity. Concerns about taste, texture, safety, even if regulators approve it, and just the idea of meat grown in a lab feeling unnatural.
So education is key.
Huge amounts of consumer education and really smart marketing will be needed to explain the benefits and, frankly, normalize it.
You mentioned scaling earlier as maybe the single biggest challenge, tying into cost and availability. Can you dig into that a bit more? Why is scaling so hard?
It really boils down to the sheer volume needed. Think about how much meat is consumed globally. Current cultivated meat facilities are, relatively speaking, tiny.
Like Good Meat's biggest bioreactor is 1,200 liters, you said.
Right, which sounds big, but to supply even a fraction of national demand, say in the U.S., you'd need bioreactors holding maybe 200,000 liters or more. Many of them.
That's a whole different scale of manufacturing.
Completely. It requires enormous investment, building these massive facilities, scaling up the manufacturing of the bioreactors themselves, creating entirely new supply chains for the growth medium ingredients, distribution networks. It's a monumental industrial challenge. It's very capital intensive.
Okay. And we talked about the environmental pluses, but I remember reading it's not quite that simple. There's a counter-argument.
Yes, it's important to have that nuance. While the potential is there, especially with land and water, the energy use is significant. A study from Oxford back in 2019 pointed this out.
What did it say?
It suggested that if the energy used to power these bioreactors and facilities comes mainly from fossil fuels, the overall greenhouse gas emissions could potentially be higher than some types of conventional farming, particularly chicken or pork.
So the green promise depends heavily on green energy.
Critically, the environmental benefits, especially for climate change, really hinge on these facilities being powered by renewable energy sources. If they are, the footprint looks much better. If not, it's more complicated.
That makes sense. What about other ethical debates? Beyond just veganism, any religious issues?
Oh, absolutely. It gets complex. We mentioned it's not vegan. But then you get into religious dietary laws like halal and kosher.
How does lab-grown meat fit in there?
Well, interpretations vary widely. For example, a major Islamic organization in Indonesia, Nahdlatul Ulama, apparently declared it haram, unclean, and forbidden.
Oh, right.
That was their reported ruling. But then you contrast that with Qatar, a Muslim-majority nation which is investing heavily in cultivated meat and even building a plant with good meat, so clearly not a unified view.
And for kosher rules?
There's actually quite a bit of discussion and even excitement in some circles. The London Beth Din, a major rabbinical court, has explored whether cultivated meat could be considered parev.
Parev meaning neutral, neither meat nor dairy.
Exactly. If derived from cells taken harmlessly, maybe grown without blood, could it be eaten with dairy? Could it make kosher meat cheaper or more accessible? It's a fascinating theological and practical debate with huge implications if it leans that way. It just shows how differently it's being interpreted across and even within faiths. And there's another big ethical and economic question. What happens to traditional farmers?
Right. If this takes off, what does it mean for ranchers, livestock farmers?
It's a valid concern. There could certainly be job displacement, a need for retraining. It's a potential disruption to rural economies that depend on livestock.
Are there ideas for how farmers might adapt?
People are thinking about it. Maybe some farmers pivot to smaller, high-welfare, premium niche markets that cultivated meat doesn't compete with directly. Others might shift towards more integrated systems like agroecology, or maybe they could even transition to growing crops needed for the cell culture media or other crops altogether. It's a transition that would need careful management and support.
Okay, one technical point I remember hearing about was the growth medium itself.
Didn't it used to rely on something controversial? FBS.
Yes. Fetal bovine serum, or FBS. That was a big issue historically.
What is it?
It's derived from the blood of cow fetuses obtained during slaughter. So, aside from the ethical concerns for many, it's also very expensive and variable in quality, and obviously not vegetarian.
So not ideal for scaling or for broad acceptance. How did they solve that?
The industry has largely moved away from it, or is actively doing so. Most companies now are developing or using animal-free media. Often they use precision fermentation using genetically engineered yeast or other microbes to produce the specific growth factors and proteins needed, much like how insulin for diabetics is made, so they can make the food without using animal products.
Exactly. Though it's worth noting some of the currently approved products, like Good Meats Chicken in Singapore, still use FBS in their process, but they are actively working on getting their FBS-free methods approved by regulators as well. It's a transition in progress.
Okay, and one last challenge back to texture. Getting that steak-like bite. Still tough.
Still one of the biggest technical challenges, yes. Recreating the complex structure, the chew, the marbling of a whole cut of meat like a steak or a chicken breast is significantly harder than making a ground product.
That's where the scaffolding comes in again.
Yes, advanced scaffolding is key. Maybe using things like vegan collagen. Often, companies are also experimenting with combining cultivated cells with plant-based proteins to get closer to that desired texture and mouthfeel. It's a real bioengineering puzzle they're still working hard to solve.
Right. So wrapping this all up, it feels like cultivated meat is this genuinely massive potential shift, doesn't it? How we make and eat protein.
It really does. The potential to tackle huge issues, environmental damage from livestock, animal welfare concerns, feeding a growing planet sustainably, it's immense.
But as we've discussed, the challenges are equally immense.
Yeah.
Regulation, cost, getting people on board, the sheer scale needed.
Absolutely. It's not a done deal by any means. But the momentum is there. Industry analysts, despite the hurdles, seem pretty optimistic. Some predict lab-grown meat could capture maybe up to 10% of the global meat market by 2030.
10% by 2030. That's
Yeah.
actually quite significant.
It would be. Driven by, technology getting better and cheaper, hopefully more regulatory pathways opening up, and maybe shifting consumer views, especially among younger generations.
So as this journey continues, moving, like we said, from sci-fi towards the supermarket, it leaves us, and you listening, with a pretty big question, I think.
Which is?
When you think about feeding billions of people, protecting the planet, what does meat actually mean to you? And, maybe more importantly, how much are you willing to let that definition change?